Welcome back to Beyond the Comfort Zone Talking Shit with KING-KAMBUF. So today we're doing a deep dive into, well, an extraordinary document. We're not looking at a finished building plan. We're looking at something more foundational, the intellectual engine room, really. It's the KING-KAMBUF Studio Design Command Brief for the Nation of KAMBUF Project Investments, and it's dated December 11th, 2025. And I have to say, this isn't just an architectural brief. It feels more like a strategic mandate for, well, for nation building.
It really is. It's a remarkable read. I mean, what you have here is basically a declaration. It's a declaration that the practice of architecture is, completely inseparable from political and social reform. And the whole thing is organized around today's studio theme, which just captures the entire scope of their ambition. The theme is climate adaptive housing and spatial justice city regions.
Wow.
It's where that urgent need for climate safety meets the historical imperative for equitable land reform.
Okay, let's unpack that core concept first because it's huge. The brief sets out this staggering central purpose to design housing as, and I'm quoting here, liberation infrastructure.
Yes.
That phrasing, that goes so far beyond just simple shelter. It suggests the physical act of building is a tool for systemic change.
Precisely. That's the whole idea. If you're building liberation infrastructure, you're treating the dwelling, the district, the whole city as an active mechanism, a mechanism designed to counteract historical and, environmental disadvantages.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, it means ensuring spatial justice, which is just fair access to resources and services. It means guaranteeing climate safety against extreme heat and flooding, upholding community dignity, and actively driving economic empowerment through the structure itself, not treating these things as some kind of optional add-on.
And to get to that very high-level ethical goal, the brief immediately pivots to extremely concrete technical targets. They're not just talking about a vague hope for sustainability. We're seeing mandates for developing heat-resilient envelopes, for engineering entire flood-safe districts.
And using circular material housing systems to minimize waste.
Right. And establishing community land trusts for local control,
Yep.
and then pioneering brand new KMBUF urban prototypes. It's incredibly comprehensive.
It is. And what's fascinating here is that integrated approach to resource management. When they mandate circular material housing systems, what they're doing is pushing back against the dominant linear take, make, dispose model of construction.
Which is how almost everything is built now.
It is. So in this context, circular means the materials, maybe it's compressed earth or specific locally sourced wood or recycled building components, they're all designed to be disassembled and reused.
Yeah.
It minimizes embodied carbon and it maximizes local resource efficiency. There's an entire economic strategy built right into the wall assembly.
And this is where the technical demand becomes, I think, the most challenging part of the whole brief. The master challenge focus, which is the technical engine driving this whole social mission, is parametric form finding. So for our listeners who might not be immersed in advanced design computation, can you explain why this rule-based logic is so essential for meeting these big climate and justice goals?
The parametric focus is, well, it's the necessary technical tool. You just couldn't handle the sheer complexity otherwise. You're trying to optimize 10 completely different projects across multiple climate zones. You've got everything from Saharan dust to Caribbean hurricanes, and do it in a really rapid time frame.
Yeah.
So we have to move past the idea of a static, standardized drawing. Instead, the designer defines the rules.
The rules? Like what?
Things like a minimum ventilation rate, a maximum solar gain, the exact angle of the sun at the summer solstice, the anticipated 100-year flood elevation. You feed the data in.
So the design isn't drawn. It's what generated by the rules you input.
Exactly. That's the key. The software uses that rule-based logic to find the optimal form, which is where form finding comes from. This is how you get climate-driven housing geometries optimized for specific windflow courtyards, or solar-responsive facades that track the sun to provide self-shading, or those critical flood-lifted plates.
So the geometry itself becomes a direct output of the environmental data.
It is a measured output, which ensures the solution is bespoke, it's optimized for resilience, and it's defensible against climate impacts, rather than just being, an aesthetic choice.
That technical mandate sounds incredibly powerful, but it also brings up an immediate critical question that I'm sure the brief has to address. We know these high-level computational tools and the training you need for parametric design, they're expensive. So how can the brief mandate such advanced tools in regions where, local capacity or funding might be constrained? Does it mention anything about training or capacity building for local architects?
Well, that's the constant tension in projects of this scale. And the brief does address it, if implicitly, in the next sections on the implementation structure. The requirement for things like 90-minute concept blocks and drawing and detail blocks suggests they're integrating this advanced design capability into a process that demands really rapid iteration. So while the brief doesn't detail a training budget, the expectation seems to be that the designs are done in collaboration. You leverage external expertise, the KING-KAMBUF studio, to generate the initial parameters, while local teams are mandated to execute the localized parts, like the land justice mapping and community governance portions.
So the process itself is a capacity-building exercise.
Exactly. It's designed to transfer the methodology, not just hand over a finished plan.
Okay, so let's dive deeper into that operational structure, because if the architecture is supposed to deliver this liberation infrastructure at pace, the design process itself has to be revolutionary.
It does. That technical engine, parametric form finding, demands that every single geometry has to be demonstrably optimized against specific environmental conditions.
You have to show your work.
You have to show your work. The brief mandates a fundamental shift in design thinking. The solutions have to be generated through rule-based logic. It's a scientific, data-driven approach. You have to demonstrate the wind flow, prove the solar shading, model the structural performance against the expected flood or wind load. This ensures the design is actually effective, not just, well-intentioned.
And the implementation structure they lay out suggests a pretty relentless, high-pressure environment. These are rapid deployment sprints. Can you detail those operational instruction blocks for us?
The workflow is structured for maximum efficiency and coverage. The teams have mandatory choices. First, they have to select one short study. This is a tight 60 to 90-minute block, choosing from 3 very localized, focused options.
Okay, what are they?
It's either #2, the Accra Land Trust, #5, the Dakar Sandwind, or #8, the African American South Heat Save Project. Then they have to select one long commission. This is much more intensive, 180+ minutes. And they choose from the big flagship infrastructure projects. That's #1, the Lagos Mid-Rise, #4, the Nairobi River Edge, or #10, the KING-KAMBUF Prototype Capital.
That structure is interesting. It forces the teams to toggle between these quick, conceptual, neighborhood-level adaptations and then these deeply detailed, long-term infrastructural developments. You're jumping from the specifics of a dust baffle in Dakar to the monumental structure of a new capital.
It's designed specifically to prevent design silos. You can't just be a high-level conceptual architect. You also have to demonstrate that you can execute the rapid, detailed, localized solution.
Which brings us to that crucial intersection of the technical and the social, the 90-minute concept block focus. This 3-part instruction seems to ensure that the computation can't ignore the community. What are those 3 essential tasks?
Right, so the first 2 are technical, and they flow directly from the parametric mandate. First is generating climate-driven parametric massing, that's the geometry. And second is diagramming the climate response, proving that the ventilation, the shading, the flood resistance, it all works. But the third task, is the real linchpin of the entire brief.
Which is?
Mapping land justice and community governance.
That third task, that's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, what does mapping land justice and community governance actually require the designers to show? That's not a typical architectural drawing.
No, not at all. It's basically a political document that you overlay on the architectural plan. It requires designers to demonstrate geographically how the new housing or district facilitates equitable land access and local decision-making.
So things like showing existing property lines.
Exactly. Are they showing existing informal tenure lines that have to be respected? Are they proposing new collective ownership zones like a community land trust or CLT? Are they mapping out where a community governance assembly hall would go relative to the housing blocks? This task forces the designer to think not just about walls and windows, but about ownership, about power dynamics.
The structure has to be located on the drawing right next to the legal mechanism that protects the residents.
Precisely. It's a mechanism to ensure that spatial innovation is directly accountable to social responsibility.
And that accountability continues right through to the final stage, the ESG mandate. This is how success is measured. How do we know if the design actually worked in delivering liberation?
This is maybe the most radical part of the entire brief. They mandate that the success of the design is tied directly to measurable climate and social impact metrics. And these metrics have to be annotated right on the final plans. This ensures that, aesthetic success or structural stability aren't the only measures.
Let's detail those 3 required ESG metrics, because they really translate these lofty goals into quantifiable performance indicators.
Okay, so first, you have the direct climate adaptation measure. Cooling load decrease with a down arrow. It has to be quantified by kilowatt hours saved per dwelling or district compared to standard construction.
So it proves the heat resilience strategies like shading and passive cooling are actually effective.
It does. Second is resource efficiency. Water use decrease, again with a down arrow.
And the third metric is the key social justice indicator.
Absolutely. The third metric is displacement decrease with a down arrow. And this is quantified not just by the number of households that get rehoused, but critically by the number of displacements prevented due to climate-resilient upgrades or secure land tenure mechanisms like those CLTs.
Let's just pause on that for a second. The political significance of quantifying displacement decrease on an architectural drawing it's profound. For decades, big infrastructure projects, highways, dams, housing, they were measured by how many people they displaced to make way for progress.
Right. And now this brief completely reverses that historical logic. Displacement is no longer a necessary evil of urban development. It's an index of failure. By mandating this metric, the design studio is stating, we will only consider this project successful if it measurably strengthens tenure security.
It holds the architecture itself accountable to the vulnerable.
It does. If a beautiful climate-adaptive structure is built, but its construction or the subsequent price rise causes long-term residents to be pushed out, then the design is a quantitative failure according to the brief's own terms.
That technical machinery and that metric system are clearly designed to handle immense complexity. And now the brief moves into the global portfolio, tackling some of the toughest urban challenges on the planet. Let's start with Scheme 1. Lagos, Nigeria Heat Adaptive Mid-Rise Social Housing Spine.
Lagos is, it's a perfect storm. You've got massive density, severe coastal flooding, and just crippling heat. The challenge here is specifically concentrated along major transit corridors, the bus rapid transit or BRT spines.
And that's where people are living, right along those routes.
Exactly. Informal settlements often spring up near these transit lines, which makes them vulnerable to both heat exposure and displacement as development pressures increase. So the mandate is to build 6 to 10-story modular, resilient housing right along those spines.
This means the design is immediately constrained by the high volume of traffic and the very limited footprint along the transit right-of-way. It forces verticality in a really challenging climate. What are the key technical defenses mandated against that intense heat?
The two core strategies are passive. First, evaporative cooling cores. In Lagos's hyperhumid environment, mechanical air conditioning is just prohibitively expensive and energy intensive.
So how does that work?
An evaporative cooling core uses water misting or porous materials within a central shaft, often built right into the building's core, to cool air naturally as it rises or falls. Now, the humidity limits its efficiency compared to arid climates, but it still provides a crucial reduction in internal temperature without a heavy electricity demand.
And the second strategy?
Perforated shading panels on the exterior. And these are designed using the parametric system to block the sun's direct rays while still allowing natural ventilation and diffuse light to get in.
So it's architecture working with physics to lower that cooling load, which directly addresses one of those ESG metrics. The brief cites the Makoko Floating School as a successful precedent, at least for its adaptive vision. It acknowledges its site-specific innovation.
Right. That school was a globally celebrated example of localized ingenuity. It was a structure built on water, responding to a community where land itself is unstable. But the brief includes a crucial cautionary tale.
The school collapsed in 2016.
It did. And the lesson the KING-KAMBUF studio is meant to draw from that failure is about the severe limitations of innovation without a proportional investment in resilience engineering and long-term maintenance.
So the collapse wasn't just a physical failure.
No, it was a planning failure. When you're operating in dynamically unstable climate environments, whether you're floating on a lagoon or enduring extreme heat cycles, the technical elegance of the design has to be matched by structural robustness, by redundancy, and a robust, community-driven maintenance schedule.
If the structure is too fragile or complex for the locals to maintain, it fails the liberation infrastructure test.
Exactly.
That structural resilience lesson is critical. Let's pivot now from the intense heat and density of Lagos to Scheme 4, Nairobi, Kenya Flood-Resilient River Edge Housing District. Here, the primary threat is devastating seasonal flooding along the river systems.
Nairobi presents a monumental task, both environmentally and socially. You have these historical informal settlements right along the riparian edges, communities living literally in the path of the river, exposed to severe danger. So the mandate is to replace that unsafe informality while managing the inevitable severe 1.10 to 1.200 year floods.
And restore the river ecology at the same time.
And restore the river ecology that's been degraded by that encroachment.
Yeah.
It's a huge task.
So the goal isn't just to house people safely, but to perform ecological healing as part of the architecture. The technical answer seems to be leveraging that parametric mandate again, parametric floodplate grids and raised walkways.
That's right. The parametric system is used to calculate the exact height and the structural load required to raise the entire district above the anticipated flood level. It uses a grid of elevated plates, and these plates allow floodwaters to pass underneath the structures without causing structural damage or interrupting services.
And the materials have to be water tolerant.
They do. Water tolerant and easily cleaned after a major event, allowing for a really rapid recovery.
The brief cites the Kibera Public Space Project as a success for its participatory upgrading approach, but the caution regarding spatial justice here is profound.
It's a very sobering reminder of history. The brief explicitly warns that past Kenyan slum clearances caused deep trauma, livelihood loss, and social disruption. Just moving people from the riverbank to a new structure, however safe it is, often means separating them from their established informal economies or social networks.
So how does the brief try to mitigate that trauma?
The implementation strategy is highly sensitive. It relies on a dedicated river authority and a meticulous relocation compensation fund.
And that fund is the critical mechanism.
It is. It has to be managed not just to pay for relocation costs, but to provide genuine livelihood replacement or support during the transition. It has to ensure that moving to safety doesn't mean moving to poverty. The designers have to incorporate this economic mechanism into their planning to truly build liberation, not just structures.
This need for cultural sensitivity and highly specific climate adaptation continues in Scheme 5. Dakar, Senegal Sand Wind Cooling Housing Cluster. This introduces a completely different atmospheric threat, where fine Saharan dust cycles mixing with coastal humidity.
Dakar is right where the Atlantic cooling winds meet the Saharan dust clouds. And the challenge is incredibly nuanced. You need natural ventilation for cooling, that coastal breeze, but you have to simultaneously screen out microscopic dust infiltration, which is a major health hazard.
And if you block the dust, you block the cooling and risk overheating.
You got it. So the design needs to be highly selective about what it lets in.
How do you do that?
It requires wind tunnel massing, where the complex shape of the cluster is modeled computationally to capture and funnel the cooling breeze efficiently into courtyards and homes. And then you need specialized interventions. Dust baffle courtyards. These are designed internal spaces or systems, maybe walls or screens with specific porosity and geometry, that slow the air down just enough to drop the heavier dust particles before the air enters the living spaces.
And this leads to the requirement for a porous solid hybrid facade.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that? How does a porous solid hybrid facade operate?
It's a dynamic envelope solution. Imagine a wall that's solid in the parts that get the highest solar load, but it uses highly specialized filtered screens or layered brickwork in the areas receiving the prevailing wind. The porous elements have to have a specific dimension and depth to allow air movement while capturing or diverting those fine dust particles. And the caution here is relevant. A lot of previous mass housing blocks in West Africa prioritized speed and ignored the microclimate. The result was non-ventilated, unshaded blocks that suffer from terrible overheating.
Which is exactly what this Dakar design seeks to avoid.
Precisely. The hybrid facade is the sophisticated answer to a simple climate dilemma.
Okay, finally, in this African portfolio section, the brief tackles the immense challenges of desertification and climate-driven internal migration. This is Scheme 9. Pan-African interior nomadic housing and mobility infrastructure. Adaptation here means supporting movement, not stopping it.
This is a direct challenge to fixed Western ideas of infrastructure. The brief focuses on providing adaptive shelter for pastoralist communities who are facing intensifying desertification and changing grazing routes. And the key priority is dignity and cultural mobility.
The technical focus is fascinating. Modular kinetic housing and a specific water harvest skin detail. What does kinetic housing even mean for a community that has to move with the seasons?
Kinetic housing means structures that are designed to be easily disassembled, moved, and then reassembled. Or maybe they're wheel-based or collapsible. Think highly efficient, rapidly deployable shelters made of lightweight, robust circular materials.
And the water harvesting skin.
The structure's skin, or envelope, has to be engineered for extreme efficiency. So the water harvest skin detail means the exterior surface itself is designed to capture and channel precious, infrequent rainfall efficiently into storage systems. You're maximizing water collection from the smallest possible footprint.
The service infrastructure is designed as micro-hub services to support this movement. But the core tension here seems severe. The brief warns against harmful sedentarization policies.
That tension is paramount. Historically, many governments have tried to modernize or control nomadic populations by forcing them into permanent settlements. This often leads to cultural collapse, the loss of traditional livelihoods, and increased poverty.
So the brief says that providing new infrastructure, even climate-adaptive shelter, can be destructive.
It can be. It is destructive if it forces a fixed lifestyle that contradicts traditional and often environmentally sustainable mobility patterns. The design must serve the existing cultural practice of mobility. The mobility cannot be sacrificed for the design.
And how do they ensure that?
The implementation strategy involves co-designing directly with pastoralist councils, recognizing that their deep knowledge of the land is essential to any viable solution.
Okay, Section 3 shifts the focus a bit. It demonstrates that liberation infrastructure is often about retrofitting existing systems of inequality. We begin with Scheme 3. Johannesburg, South Africa, Spatial Justice Transit Hub Housing Retrofit. This seems like a direct mandate to reverse the physical legacy of apartheid spatial planning.
The challenge in Johannesburg is profound. Apartheid planners intentionally fragmented cities. They placed black townships far from economic centers and transport links, creating vast distances and economic barriers. The mandate here is to take underused, often derelict apartheid-era station precincts and structurally retrofit them into mixed-use housing hubs.
So transit-oriented development, or TOD?
Right, a TOD that stitches those fragmented neighborhoods back together and uplifts township economies by making commerce accessible.
The design details require some intensive engineering, a structural retrofit of 1970s concrete shells, and the integration of market integration plans. They're literally turning this hardened infrastructure into vibrant commerce and community space.
They're injecting social life and economic vitality into inert, often brutalist infrastructure. The design requires transit-linked parametric courtyard housing. So, housing that wraps around and interacts with the station, integrating it into the urban fabric, not isolating it. And the market integration plans are crucial. They dictate that local markets, retail spaces, workshops, they all have to be physically integrated into the design, allowing residents to access jobs and commerce immediately.
The brief cites the Bridge City mixed-use development as a success precedent for this integration model. But the critical caution here is about longevity.
The caution is immediate, and it's essential. Many TODs in South Africa have failed due to weak maintenance and low local hiring.
So you can retrofit a building beautifully.
But if the local government or the development authority fails to maintain the structure, it rapidly degrades. It leads to exactly the kind of decay that plagues vulnerable communities. And furthermore, if the new jobs that are created aren't specifically targeted toward local residents from the surrounding townships, the economic benefit just leaks out, and the project fails its spatial justice mandate.
So the architecture has to be paired with robust long-term policy.
Ownership and hiring quotas, absolutely.
That continuous link between shelter and economic necessity is amplified in Scheme 6, Ethiopia Addis Peri-Urban Agro-Housing Cooperative. Here, the housing is literally designed to feed the city.
Ethiopia is facing massive internal migration. They're going to need housing for an anticipated 1 million new residents. The core challenge is preventing uncontrolled sprawl, where the city expands horizontally, consuming valuable farmland while simultaneously integrating livelihood.
And the mandate is to create a housing and food production belt around Addis Ababa.
Yes, the design has to make the structure productive. It has to integrate food production.
How does it do that?
The design is entirely integrated around agriculture. We're talking about parametric block, farm, shared, managed agricultural spaces optimized for local crops, calculated via the parametric system for maximum yield and minimum water use. And this is supported by shared infrastructure like irrigation systems and the architectural integration of rooftop greenhouse modules right on the buildings themselves.
So the resident doesn't just live there. They are an active member of a cooperative farming system. The poster required for this one summarizes the mission. Housing feeds the city.
It creates a new form of communal resilience. The cooperative ownership model, supported by microfinance, embeds both food security and economic activity directly into the housing structure.
But there's a crucial historical caution here.
There is. The brief warns. Resettlement sites failing due to no jobs or transit. This is a warning that simply relocating people to a safe area, even with integrated farms, will fail if they can't access the larger economy. If the new residents have no way to sell their produce or access jobs outside that perimeter, the entire cooperative risks becoming an isolated economic island.
So the architecture must be explicitly linked to robust transit and economic markets.
It has to be.
This grounding in livelihood and climate security brings us to Scheme 2. Accra, Ghana Community Land Trust Housing for Coastal Informal Settlements. This scheme focuses primarily on the governance model of land tenure as the critical defense.
This is a brilliant intervention against the dual existential threats of 1. Coastal erosion and flooding, and 2. Eviction pressures from rapid development. The challenge is to make collective ownership, facilitated by a community land trust, the active strategy for climate adaptation, and spatial justice.
So for our listeners, what exactly is a community land trust, a CLT, and why is it so essential here?
A CLT is a nonprofit organization that owns the land underneath the homes, in perpetuity. The residents own the physical structures, but they lease the land collectively from the CLT. And this mechanism legally separates the value of the building from the value of the land.
Which removes the primary driver of displacement, speculation.
Exactly. By keeping the land in a communal trust, the CLT provides a collective legal defense against government clearance or coastal development pressures. It's the governance structure that makes the physical adaptation possible.
And the required deliverables reflect this governance focus. A detailed land trust district diagram overlaid on the elevated housing massing with a flood-prevented ground floor.
And the implementation strategy relies heavily on local assembly, plus NGOs, plus resident cooperatives.
Why that participatory strategy?
Because the brief cautions. Many governed relocations fail due to livelihood disruptions and lack of cultural fit. The lesson from decades of urban upgrading is that if the government dictates the solution, even if it's well-intentioned, it often ignores the established social and economic realities of the community. The CLT, driven by resident cooperatives, ensures that the adaptation, the elevated housing, the flood-vented ground floor, is built precisely to the specifications and needs of the people who will live there.
Securing their tenure and integrating their livelihood from day one.
Right. The technical solution is irrelevant without the legal protection that the CLT offers.
Okay, now the brief demonstrates that its vision of spatial justice isn't limited by geography. It extends the focus to vulnerable communities in the diaspora. Let's look first at Scheme 7. Caribbean diaspora hurricane-resilient housing for an island neighborhood.
The climate threat here is structural violence. It's about retrofitting and elevating coastal homes to resist the high winds and storm surge associated with Category 4 and 5 hurricanes. We're talking about resisting sustained winds of 150 to 200 miles per hour. This is survival architecture.
The technical focus is intense, starting with parametric roof uplift analysis. That sounds like a pretty sophisticated defense mechanism.
It is. It's the analysis of the single point of highest failure in most storms, the roof. The parametric system models the aerodynamic forces acting on the roof structure under extreme wind loads. It identifies weak points and prescribes specific structural reinforcements like reinforced connections between the roof trusses and the walls that prevent the roof from being peeled off.
And the designs also mandate elevated foundations and robust shutter system design.
To guard against storm surge and to protect windows from flying debris, yes.
The implementation strategy acknowledges the unique funding landscape in the diaspora, relying on FEMA parallel local programs plus diaspora funding.
This recognizes that national insurance or recovery programs in these territories are often insufficient or slow. So the implementation has to tap into the economic power of diaspora networks and specialized local resilience funds that mirror the strict technical requirements of international programs, like FEMA or the World Bank's recovery standards.
But the caution here is highly pragmatic, and it speaks to a global cycle of vulnerability. Post-storm rebuilds often repeat vulnerabilities due to cost pressures.
Right. When a community is devastated, the immediate pressure is to provide shelter now. And that often means rebuilding quickly with the cheapest, most accessible materials, which just locks in the very vulnerabilities that led to the disaster in the first place.
So the KMUF designers are explicitly mandated to counter that.
They are. They have to integrate cost-effectiveness with extreme resilience, ensuring that the necessary structural robustness like hurricane-rated windows and reinforced ties is prioritized over short-term savings to break that disastrous cycle.
That tension between cost and structural integrity connects directly to Scheme 8. African American South Heat Safe Neighborhood Retrofit. This addresses climate disparity rooted in systemic historical injustice right in the United States.
This is a spatial justice mandate aimed at mitigating extreme heat mortality in historically redlined neighborhoods. These are communities that historical housing policies intentionally starved of resources like basic infrastructure, tree canopy, efficient energy sources, leaving them uniquely vulnerable to escalating heat waves.
The goal is cooling justice and energy sovereignty.
It is. And the deliverables directly counter that historical denial of resources. They include a district shade model, a cool roof detail, and a sketch for a community solar microgrid.
Okay, so the district shade model uses parametric analysis to design the optimal placement of shade trees and structures to maximize cooling.
And lower the urban heat island effect across the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yes. The cool roof detail mandates materials that reflect solar energy rather than absorbing it, which significantly lowers internal temperatures and reduces the cooling load, directly aligning with that ESG metric. And critically, the community solar microgrid sketch aligns with federal initiatives like Justice 40, ensuring that new, resilient energy infrastructure, like shared local solar power, benefits marginalized residents directly, not just wealthy commercial entities.
They cite the success of the Louisville Cool Roofs initiative as a positive precedent. But the critical caution here, the paradox of success, is the warning about green gentrification displacing long-term residents.
This is probably the most complex ethical hurdle in the entire brief. When a neighborhood receives valuable climate resilience infrastructure, new parks, effective cooling, solar energy, robust defenses, its desirability increases dramatically.
Which drives up property values, taxes, and rents.
And the very residents who suffered through decades of environmental neglect get pushed out by the rising cost of living before they can even reap the benefits of the new resilience.
So how does the design studio counter this? How do you mandate anti-displacement within a physical design plan?
It goes back to those legal and governance mechanisms we talked about. The designs must be integrated with local policy. If the cooling technology and the solar microgrid are linked to a community land trust or permanent affordability agreements, then the benefits like lower energy bills and secure housing are legally attached to the long-term residents, regardless of shifting market pressures.
So if the designer doesn't incorporate the legal framework to prevent displacement, the architectural success becomes a tool of economic exclusion.
And it violates the core mandate of spatial justice.
Finally, we reach the flagship vision. Scheme 10, the KING-KAMBUF Prototype Sovereign Climate Justice Housing Capital. This is the physical manifestation of the nation's founding values.
This scheme is about establishing a new capital district that projects a monumental identity built entirely on zero-carbon systems. It's the ultimate test of the brief's principles, but on a civic scale. The deliverables required, the city-region massing, the detailed civic boulevard section, and the carbon-neutral envelope detail, they show a comprehensive ambition.
Ensuring that the city's identity is synonymous with sustainability and resilience.
It is. And the funding model is national. A sovereign fund plus green bonds.
So what's the ultimate social inclusion test for a city built from scratch with this level of technological sophistication and national wealth?
The ultimate test is social inclusion and equitable access to the resources the city provides. The brief offers a final critical caution that has to inform the entire design process. Smart cities often fail if built without social inclusion. Meaning a gleaming zero-carbon capital district funded by sovereign wealth means nothing if it's only accessible to a privileged elite, or if the technology used is surveillance-heavy and alienating. The design must embody justice and the equitable distribution of resources, housing, transit, clean energy for the full spectrum of its citizenry. It has to be built with people, not just for a high-tech future.
This briefing document is so much more than a technical manual. It's a strategic policy framework. The strategic context references they provide, the deep dives into UN Habitat's work, the World Bank's urban resilience programs, the African Development Bank's housing reports, they all confirm that the KING-KAMBUF studio is operating at the cutting edge of international urban strategy.
It ensures that every specific solution we've discussed, from the Makoko lesson to the concept of kinetic housing, is grounded in a rigorous global body of knowledge. It connects those highly localized technical interventions like the dust baffle or the evaporative core to the biggest existential challenges of the 21st century.
And to close this deep dive, the KING-KAMBUF closing directive provides the final mission statement, which ties all that technical complexity back to the foundational moral imperative.
The closing directive is a powerful manifesto for how they view the built environment. It says, "Homes are the first border of sovereignty. Districts are the architecture of justice. Design with the climate as ally, with the people as co-authors, with the future as your witness. And it concludes, this is KING-KAMBUF, UF, build shelter as liberation.
It's a definition that really elevates architecture from a service industry to a form of political action.
Defining the built environment as the absolute physical embodiment of national values. Yes.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you synthesize this strategic document? We've analyzed the technical solutions, the parametric form finding, the CLTs, the cool roofs, the flood plates, all designed to overcome these cycles of vulnerability and inequality. The blueprint for liberation infrastructure is clearly laid out in concrete and geometry.
But the entire document is riddled with cautions. The risk of structural fragility, the trauma of displacement, the failure of segregated TODs, and the paradox of green gentrification. And these cautions all point to a problem that architecture alone simply cannot solve.
Which raises an important question that extends beyond the design studio and into the realm of governance. If the core problem is overcoming this cycle of vulnerability, what policy mechanisms, beyond the technical design itself, are required to ensure that climate adaptation, land trusts, and green technology are guaranteed as basic human rights and not just market-driven solutions for the privileged? How do you permanently legislate that the benefits of a cool roof and a solar microgrid are attached to the long-term residents, ensuring that liberation infrastructure remains liberation infrastructure, regardless of shifting property values or political changes? That is the ultimate policy challenge that determines whether these brilliant designs succeed or ultimately fail their social mission.